The world as we knew it is over. Not in some distant future, not in a theoretical academic debate, but right now, in real time, with real consequences for your job, your security, and your country's sovereignty. And at the very moment the old order collapses, one leader has stepped forward, not to mourn it, but to build something new from its wreckage. His name is Mark Carney, and he is now the Prime Minister of Canada, a position he assumed in March 2025 after being elected leader of the Liberal Party. On January 20, 2026, standing before the global elite at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Carney delivered a speech that wasn't just policy. It was a declaration of independence for every nation caught between the crushing gears of great power rivalry. If you're new here, I'm your host, and this channel exists to cut through the noise and expose the architecture of power, how it's built, how it breaks, and who really pays the price. If you believe ordinary citizens deserve to understand the forces shaping their lives, hit subscribe. But don't do it for me. Do it because what happens next will affect you, whether you're watching or not. What just happened? In a quiet alpine town filled with billionaires and bureaucrats, the Prime Minister of Canada declared that the so-called rules-based international order is dead. Not wounded, not strained, dead. And he didn't whisper it. He announced it with the calm certainty of a central banker who's seen markets implode before. This isn't nostalgia, it's diagnosis. Carney argued that for decades, countries like Canada played along with a comforting fiction, that international institutions would protect the weak, that trade would bind nations in mutual interest, and that American hegemony would provide stability. But that bargain has collapsed. Great powers now weaponize economic interdependence, using supply chains as choke points, financial systems as tools of coercion, and tariffs as instruments of political submission. And middle powers, he warned, can no longer afford to pretend otherwise. Now, let's reconstruct how we got here. For years, Carney was known as the steady hand in crises, the man who guided the Bank of Canada through the 2008 financial meltdown, then became the first non-British governor of the Bank of England during the Brexit chaos. He was the technocrat's technocrat, calm, data-driven, trusted by elites on both sides of the Atlantic. But something shifted. The pandemic exposed the fragility of hyper-globalized supply chains. The war in Ukraine revealed that energy dependence could be turned into a weapon overnight. And then came the strategic decoupling, not just between the U.S. and China, but across finance, technology, and critical minerals. Each crisis chipped away at the illusion that integration equals peace. By the time Carney entered Canadian politics, the writing was on the wall. He ran not on hope, but on hard realism. And after winning the leadership in 2025, his government moved with startling speed. But here's where this gets explosive. Within months of taking office, Carney's administration slashed taxes on capital gains and business investment, eliminated all federal barriers to interprovincial trade, and fast-tracked $1 trillion in domestic infrastructure, targeting energy, AI, critical minerals, and new trade corridors. They doubled defense spending by decade's end, not just to meet NATO targets, but to build sovereign industrial capacity. And abroad, 12 new trade and security deals across 4 continents in 6 months. A comprehensive strategic partnership with the European Union, including entry into the EU's defense procurement framework. New agreements with China and Qatar. Active negotiations with India, ASEAN, Thailand, the Philippines, and Mercosur. This isn't incremental diplomacy. This is a full-scale strategic pivot. Think about what that actually means. Canada is no longer waiting for Washington or Brussels to set the agenda. It's building what Carney calls value-based realism, principled in its commitment to sovereignty, human rights, and the UN Charter, but pragmatic enough to engage with rivals when interests align. On Ukraine, Canada is one of the largest per capita military contributors. On Arctic security, it's deepening ties with Denmark and Greenland, while investing in over-the-horizon radar, submarines, and fighter jets. On trade, it's trying to bridge the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the EU into a single bloc of 1.5 billion people. And on critical minerals, where Canada holds vast reserves, it's forming G7-backed buyers clubs to break dependency on single-source suppliers. This is coalition building, issue by issue, with partners who share enough common ground to act. Not naive multilateralism, not surrender to great power dictates. It gets worse for those who still believe in the old system. Carney didn't just critique the status quo. He exposed its moral rot. He invoked Václav Havel's famous essay, The Power of the Powerless, to describe how middle powers have been complicit in their own subordination. Like the greengrocer who puts up a communist slogan he doesn't believe in just to avoid trouble. Nations have kept repeating the mantra of a rules-based order, even as they're watched it applied selectively. Enforced against enemies, ignored for allies. That performance, Carney said, must end. Sovereignty today isn't about lofty declarations. It's about the ability to withstand pressure. And that requires material strength, energy independence, food security, diversified trade, and domestic industrial capacity. Without it, principled stands are just theater. This is the part no one's talking about. Carney directly confronted Canada's greatest vulnerability, its overwhelming economic dependence on the United States. Nearly 75% of Canadian exports go south. For decades, that relationship was seen as a guarantee of prosperity. Now, it's a potential lever of coercion. Yet Carney didn't flinch. He pointed out that since new U.S. tariffs were imposed, Canada has created more jobs in absolute numbers than the U.S. itself. Its economy is growing at the second fastest rate in the G7. How? By unleashing domestic investment and forging new partnerships. The message is clear. We can give ourselves far more than any foreign power can take away. That's not bravado. That's strategy. And consider the implications for NATO. When asked if the alliance is still living within the lie, Carney didn't deny the tension. He acknowledged NATO is under test, especially in the Arctic, where Russian activity is rising and U.S. commitments are uncertain. But instead of retreating into rhetoric, Canada is acting, reinforcing its northern presence, coordinating with Nordic and Baltic states, and pushing for a robust, integrated defense posture. This isn't about loyalty to an institution. It's about securing a region vital to North American and transatlantic security. And on Greenland, where Trump has floated absurd claims of purchase or annexation, Carney stood firm. Sovereignty belongs to the Greenlandic people. Full stop. Any solution must begin with their security and prosperity, not great power whims. Do the math. Carney's outreach to China isn't betrayal, it's calibration. Yes, China is authoritarian. Yes, it poses strategic challenges. But it's also Canada's second-largest trading partner and the world's second-largest economy. To cut ties unilaterally would be economic self-sabotage and strategic blindness. Instead, Carney insists on clear guardrails, cooperation in energy, agriculture, and finance, but only within frameworks that protect Canadian interests and values. This is the opposite of decoupling. It's intelligent diversification. Because in a world of fortresses, the nation with the most doors stays free. Who pays the price if this fails? You do. If middle powers continue to compete with each other for scraps from great power tables, they'll be forced into humiliating concessions on trade, on security, on human rights. Workers will see industries hollowed out by sudden supply chain ruptures. Families will face energy shocks when geopolitics overrides market logic. Democracies will erode as governments sacrifice transparency for the illusion of stability. But if Carney's vision succeeds, if middle powers pool their resilience, align their standards, and act collectively, they can create a denser, more durable web of cooperation, one that doesn't rely on the benevolence of hegemons, but on shared interest and mutual reinforcement. What happens next? Some things are already confirmed. Canada will continue its trillion-dollar domestic build-out. Defense spending will keep rising. Trade talks with India and ASEAN will accelerate. The push to link the CPTPP and EU trade blocs will gain momentum. But the bigger question is whether other middle powers join this effort. Can Germany, South Korea, Brazil, or Indonesia move beyond bilateral bargaining and form issue-based coalitions? The risk is fragmentation, everyone building their own fortress, leading to a poorer, more volatile world. The opportunity is collective sovereignty, shared investments and resilience that cost less than going it alone. Let's be clear-eyed. This isn't guaranteed to work. Great powers still hold immense leverage. Markets can turn overnight. Domestic politics in Canada or elsewhere could derail the project. But Carney's core insight remains unassailable. Pretending the old order still functions is not just foolish, it's dangerous. It lulls nations into passivity while their vulnerabilities grow. The alternative is honesty. Name the rupture. Build strength at home, diversify abroad, and act together with others who refuse to live within the lie. That's the truth Carney laid bare in Davos. The rules-based order was always a partial fiction, one that serves some better than others. But its collapse doesn't mean we must descend into a Hobbesian free-for-all. Middle powers have agency, they have resources, they have values that resonate globally. And if they choose to wield them together, they can shape a new order. Not perfect, not universal, but functional, fairer, and far more resilient. So here's the warning. The window for action is narrow. Every day spent mourning the past is a day lost to building the future. Canada has taken its sign out of the window. The question for every other nation is simple. Will you keep performing, or will you start building? This story is far from over, and we'll be tracking every move.